normally go live at this time of day, but I had the opportunity, so I figured I might as well take it. So glad that you all are here. I've got my opening remarks for you planned today, and then from there we will go to our roll call, where I'll call you out as I see you, names and locations. That'll be a lot of fun. And then from there, we will do the Super Chat questions. I'll answer your questions, and then we'll be done. And that'll be our lovely afternoon conversation. So happy Thursday. And if you haven't done so already, please tweet this out. Let all your friends know you're part of this conversation so they can join as well. Post this on your Facebook. Post this on your Twitter. Post this on Reddit. Make this a bigger conversation. The more people who watch us having our chat, the more people who participate in what we're doing, the better. So, yeah, I'm glad you're all here. We are a great community here. You all are very, very special to me. And it's really an honor and a privilege to be able to get on here and just engage with people and be part of this conversation. And before we get rolling, I do want to mention that down below I have a link to my video message to Trump supporters. Yesterday, I posted, as Donald Trump was formally being impeached by the U.S. House of Representatives, I posted my video message to Donald Trump supporters. And that message has gotten a lot of circulation. It's gotten quite a bit of attention. And I'm reading the comments, and I can tell that a number of Trump supporters are actually watching it based on the comments. And I'm sure I'll be attacked by the synthetic left for doing that. We all know that according to the synthetic left, all the Trump supporters are all evil. You should never try to win them away from Trump. You should just spit on them and curse them out. That's not my approach and never has been. All right, Workers' Party of Korea. But so if you haven't had a chance to check out that video, be sure to watch it, be sure to share it. I would like Trump supporters to see it. I hope I can get through to some of them and get them to wake up. I'm mad about some of the things they're mad about, but I don't support a demagogue like Trump. And that relates to what we're going to talk about today in these opening remarks. So there you go. Now, I wanted to mention a little bit of news, and shout out to my good friend George, who brought this to my attention. And this probably won't mean that much to many of you, but for those of you who may or may not have been part of the Occupy Wall Street protest, I know it sounds like ancient history. I found out that one of the legends of Zuccotti Park, one of the legends of the Occupy Wall Street protests, was actually arrested during the Donald Trump rally last Wednesday. That individual was named Gary. He was Scary Gary from Staten Island, and he was known for selling the China Daily newspaper. All right, left-wing nationalism. He was known for selling the China Daily newspaper at Occupy Wall Street. He was kind of a fixture of the protests, a guy who kind of gave off the vibe that he might be homeless, and he would walk around, and he could get very angry. And he would sell old copies of China Daily to Occupy Wall Street protesters, and he was kind of a legend at Occupy Wall Street. Well, apparently now he is a Trump supporter. So apparently now he was arrested, and he was arrested at the demonstration on Wednesday. I thought that was some amusing news. Donald Trump will have an impeachment trial in the U.S. Senate, so we're waiting to hear the news about that, the possibility Donald Trump could be impeached before he completes his term. That's certainly big news. So a couple things to just keep in mind. We're all watching the international situation, paying attention to what's going on in the South China Sea, in the Korean Peninsula, paying attention to what is going on in the Middle East. Yes, many hot spots around the world that are worth paying attention to in our time. But that is not what my opening remarks will be focusing on today. My opening remarks today, I'm going to start out by talking to you about a historical parallel for the time that we are living in and what we can learn from it. Folks, this is something that Marxists have always done. By trying to understand the world as it currently exists, as we try to figure out what is going on in our time, in our world, as we do that, we often make historical parallels. We often look at events that happened in history, and we try to understand them and analyze them and apply that knowledge to the present time and try to figure out what's going on in our time based on studying history. That is why history is important. By understanding history, by understanding how events happen and why they happen, those of us who are interested in getting to a whole new world, those of us who are interested in understanding the world we currently live in and maybe trying to figure out how we could change it, that is why we study history. Right? We study it not simply to be entertained by it, not simply for academic purposes. We study history because we are interested in how the world works. We are interested in the world that we currently live in and what lessons can be applied. And based on that, we are trying to determine how we can intervene in our current world and make things work out for the better. What went on in the past? What can we learn from it? So based on that, I want to take you back to 1649. Long time ago, 1649. The 17th century in England, Britain. There were events they call the English Civil War. Not a lot is taught about the English Civil War in American schools. I did not learn a thing about the English Civil War when I went to American public schools. Nothing. I learned nothing about it. But a couple years ago, I realized this was a blank spot in my knowledge. I knew nothing about Oliver Cromwell. I knew nothing about cavaliers, and Roundheads. I knew nothing about the Levelers. I knew nothing about any of this. The execution of King Charles, I knew nothing about this. So I investigated. And there are a number of key lessons for our time that you can learn by studying the English Civil War that are very relevant to what it is I want to talk to you about today. So, the English Civil War took place the same reason revolutions and civil wars generally happen, because there was a divide in the ruling class of England. There was a divide in the ruling class of England. The Parliament represented the capitalist class, the city-dwelling merchants, factory owners. That was the capitalist class. They were represented by the Parliament. And the monarchy, the king, represented the rural estates, the old aristocracy, the rural landowners, the farming folks. There was a big divide in the ruling class. And it got to the point that there was a war between King Charles, the monarch, and the Parliament. The Parliament and the monarchy were at war with each other over who would rule the country. It was a war. And the king was associated with the Church of England, which was the official state religion. And he was viewed by the capitalists, the city-dwelling capitalists of Britain, as being tied in and, secretly sympathetic to Catholicism. Even though he had the Church of England, they argued he was soft on the Catholics. And what then took place was that in order to defeat the king and in order to defeat the monarchy, the Parliament had to bring masses of people into politics. It was necessary to bring people into politics. And this is a very key parallel to our time. Right? Most of the time, the capitalists of the world would prefer, the ruling classes of the world would prefer that we don't think about politics. Maybe we go vote for one of their candidates. They would prefer that we, the average people, not be politically engaged. They want us thinking about football. They want us thinking about pornography. They want us thinking about religion, perhaps. They don't want us to be politically engaged. There's a huge effort to lock the people out of politics. But when the English Civil War happened, the two factions in the ruling class needed to have people go out and fight their wars for them. Right? And so in order to do that, They had to politically engage the populations. And it's remembered as a moment in British history where for the first time, people were highly engaged in politics. People were highly engaged because the ruling class wanted to build up forces, wanted to mobilize the population to fight their battles for them. So the working class, the peasantry, the population that was usually locked out of politics, usually encouraged not to be political, was brought into the political process. The printing press had just been invented. And in order to build up political consciousness among the people, pamphlets were printed. And thousands of pamphlets were distributed in London and other places. And among those who opposed the Cavaliers, opposed the monarchy, and were fighting for the Parliament, many of those who were fighting were Protestants, were radical Protestants who rejected the Church of England. All right? Talk about Oliver Cromwell. He was a Protestant who rejected the Church of England. He was a Puritan. All right? There was a sect they called the Levelers. And the Levelers were a group of people who wanted to expand voting rights to all of the population. Not all of the population, but among the population. They wanted to greatly expand voting rights. Oliver Cromwell and most of the people that were fighting for the Parliament argued that only those who owned property should be able to vote. But the Levelers were a mass movement, a movement of working class people who wanted to expand the right to vote among the population. And the Levelers had debates with people, and churches were filled with thousands of people to listen to debates on who should have the right to vote. Should it only be property owners who have the right to vote, or should other people have the right to vote? The Levelers, they wrote a manifesto of their beliefs, and they distributed it widely across Britain and across the cities, urging the expansion of the right to vote. Right? The ruling class was divided. They were bringing people into the political process. Well, this is what is happening in our time. Nazis were socialists. Response. This is what's happening in our time. In the 90s, people were very apolitical. People were very locked out of politics. Average Americans cared about football and baseball and what the celebrities are doing this week. But in our time, there are huge efforts now to bring people into politics, right? Just like in order to mobilize the population to defeat the king, the capitalists of London, basically urged trying to bring people into politics. Now we have the ruling class of America. As there's divisions in the ruling class. They're trying to bring people into politics. Why do you think QAnon has been created among Trump supporters? Why do you think Jacobin all of a sudden has a whole bunch of money? Why do you think there are socialist voices all across social media right now? There are factions in the ruling class that are trying to bring workers into politics and bring them into politics to fight their battles for them, right? The left-wing voices are mobilized to fight the faction of the ruling class that is against Trump. The right-wing voices are mobilized to fight the factions of the ruling class that are in favor of Trump, right? QAnon is a mobilization to support Donald Trump. We saw what they did on Capitol Hill. The DSA and Black Lives Matter is a mobilization to oppose Trump. When there are divisions in the ruling class utilizes the people to fight their battles. And suddenly, people are brought into politics and encouraged to be political. And that happened in 1649. And among those who opposed the king and supported the Parliament, there were many different factions that emerged. I talked about the Levelers. I talked about the Puritans. They talked about Roundheads, right? They were Roundheads because working class people did not have big, long hair and locks, right? It was gentlemen, wealthy people had big, long hair and locks. Working class people had very short hair. They had round heads. That's where the term comes from. The Roundheads, the working class, were brought into politics. And there were many religious and political movements among the Roundheads, among the working class, that were brought into politics. These Levelers that I mentioned. They would march into battle with their hats on, with their manifesto, the manifesto of the Levelers in their hats. It was their symbol, was their manifesto. You can compare it almost to like Mao's little red book or something. And it was there were many different sects of radical Protestants who rejected the Church of England, rejected Catholicism, and were fighting against King Charles for the Parliament. And one of the groups that was formed was called the True Levelers. The True Levelers. And the True Levelers, right, they were arguing that the levelers who wanted to just expand the right to vote were not radical enough. The True Levelers, they were a utopian socialist movement. They were a group of people who opposed the private ownership of land. They argued that land should be held in common. And the True Levelers, who wrote this manifesto, seized control of St. George's Hill. And there was a brief utopian socialist uprising in the middle of the English Civil War, led by the True Levelers, who later became known as the Diggers. And they seized St. George's Hill. They were eventually put down. Right? And that happens in every revolution. In revolutions, right, you'll have factions, among the side that wins that are more radical and less radical, and there's usually a period where they call thermidor, where the revolution takes a step backwards and there is suppression of the radical elements that want to go further. Well, the True Levelers, the socialists, right, the utopian socialist peasants who seized St. George's Hill, they were far more progressive than Oliver Cromwell, even far more progressive than the Levelers. They were the True Levelers, they were the Diggers, and they wanted to create a society with no property, where the land was held in common. The Diggers, right? 1649, their rebellion was put down. But there's a lot we can learn from this, right? That in this, where did the Diggers' revolt come from? It came from the fact that in the middle of all this confusion in the ruling class, in the middle of a moment where workers were being brought into politics, in the middle of a period where people were being encouraged to think about justice and the rights of man and freedom, where big debates were taking place, where thousands of people would pile into these churches to hear debates about who should have the right to vote and who shouldn't, in that moment, a utopian socialist movement was able to kind of carve out their own following and eventually seize control of St. George's Hill temporarily. And that tends to be what happens, right? The Russian Revolution, there was a divide in the ruling class. The Bolsheviks were the anti-war people, and through that divide, they were able to maneuver to become the ruling party. China, the Japanese invade, Chinese are fighting the Japanese invaders, and it was through that the Chinese Communist Party was eventually able to come to power. That maneuvering within these divisions within the ruling class, that's generally how socialist revolutions tend to happen. And, this socialist uprising that took place in 1649 in Britain, it took place due to the fact there was division in the ruling class, and workers were being politicized, and that created an opening through which the levelers and the True Levelers and the Diggers could mobilize and create this socialist uprising. It was short-lived, but it was a brief utopian socialist uprising among very, very religious people, and they temporarily, were able to establish a kind of commune on St. George's Hill before they were put down. And it's interesting because they've been memorialized. There are two songs about them that are quite popular among British leftists, right? There's one song that's from the 1960s. It's called "The World Turned Upside Down." It was written in the 1960s. But there's a much older song that was written shortly afterwards, maybe less than 100 years after the Diggers' uprising. And there's been various recordings of it. It was written in the 1700s, and it was commemorating the Diggers and commemorating them as heroes of the common people against the rich. In Britain, you eventually have the Chartist movement, the first working class movement ever to emerge in the world. You had the Chartist movement that was fighting against the capitalists and demanding a 12-hour workday. You had mass uprisings for universal male suffrage. And eventually suffrage for all people, and you had the first labor unions emerging. As Britain was emerging to be a capitalist, imperialist power, you had working class movements. And many of these working class movements, were very inspired by what the Diggers had done in 1649. And so if you read the lyrics to this song written in the 1700s, the song written in the 1700s, there was a song celebrating the Diggers and their uprising. I'm going to read you one stanza that stands out from the song commemorating the Diggers and the True Levelers for their uprising. I'm just going to read you one stanza. The lawyers they conjoin, stand up now, stand up now. The lawyers they conjoin, stand up now. To rescue they advise, such fury they devise. The devil in them lies, and hath blinded both their eyes. Stand up now, stand up now. Now, what does that mean? What does that mean, right? So first of all, the first time I ever heard this lyric, I thought it said the lawyers, they can't join. That's not what it says. The lawyers, they conjoin. What does conjoin mean? It means come together. So in response to the true levelers having their uprising and seizing St. George's Hill, the lawyers come together. The lawyers, they conjoin. Stand up now, stand up now. The lawyers, they conjoin. Stand up now. The lawyers are coming together. To rescue, they advise. Such fury they devise. The devil in them lies, and hath blinded both their eyes. Stand up now, stand up now. Now, what is going on here? Right? So, I mean, if you read the lyrics to this song, praising the Diggers' Uprising, they talk about how the clergy and the religious leaders condemned the Diggers' Uprising. They talked about how the landlords and the rich people condemned the uprising. And they're talking about how the lawyers, right, the lawyers, those representing Britain's legal system, condemned the uprising. To rescue they advise, such fury they devise. The devil in them lies, and hath blinded both their eyes. Stand up now, stand up now. American Socialists being classist. When I think about these lyrics to this song from the 1700s celebrating the uprising of the Diggers, I am forced to think about engaging with some of the people in the socialist movement now, or at least on the internet talking about socialism, who seem to have kind of lost their way, right? There's a lot of pessimism in the socialist movement now. There's a lot of destructive impulses. Socialism is a fundamentally optimistic ideology. It says that the working people can come together and take control of the banks, factories, and industries, the major centers of economic power. The means of production can be organized to serve public good and not profits. It says that we can get beyond capitalism and get to a rationally organized economy, and that eventually, through this rationally organized economy, we can build up the level of abundance in society so high that the need for a state and all coercion can disappear, that we can have a society with so much prosperity and abundance that people work only because they feel like working, and we can live from each according to their own ability, from each according to their need, to each according to their own ability, to each according to their need. Socialism is probably the most optimistic ideology there is. It argues that we can get beyond greed and poverty and scarcity and get to a socialist society. Socialism is an optimistic ideology, but we live in an age drowning. All right, black. No. We live in an age drowning in pessimism. Pessimism is everywhere. Pessimism is everywhere in our time. You cannot escape the pessimism. Everywhere around us you see huge amounts of pessimism and darkness and belief that tomorrow won't be better than today, belief that there is no point in life. I mean, we are surrounded by pessimism in our time. Pessimism is just everywhere in the age that we are living in. But socialism is fundamentally opposed to that pessimism. But if you consume the popular culture in the United States, if you watch American television, choosing a career. If you consume American television, if you get on social media, you listen to American music, you listen to what people are saying in the mainstream about politics, you are just going to be consumed with pessimism. And one thing I wanted to mention is that often when you know something is true, but your mindset has been centered around not acknowledging it. Hearing it can just fill you with rage. Fill you with rage. When you know something is true, when there's a truth that you know, but you have made a decision not to acknowledge it, your identity, your life, and your purpose has been centered around not acknowledging something that you know to be true. You will be so angry when you hear it. Great example from my life. Great example from my life. I remember for years I was part of a revolutionary organization that had no future. I was part of a political group that had, people know which one it was. I was part of one of the smaller communist parties in the United States. This group had no political future, right? This group, basically their strategy was, whatever liberals are doing, we'll try to have rallies around it, and we'll set up the cage, and we'll get the permit, and we'll just tail after whatever the liberals are doing. And I was in this group, and, as frustrated as I was with it, the group was my whole life, right? I was dedicated to building this organization and trying to work through their flaws. And I was very frustrated with the group, very frustrated with them. And I was especially frustrated with their anti-intellectual atmosphere. They had an atmosphere in the group where they thought that if you were ideological, if you read Marx and Lenin and you understood what socialism was all about, that meant that you weren't a real revolutionary, you were an armchair, you were not a real activist, right? I had somebody say to me at one point, they said, you don't want to organize people, you just want to do some communist thing. And I said, well, why are we in a communist party? If, everything, all the activism we do is some communist thing, right? But I remember while I was in this group and having my frustrations with this group, I was at a political event one time, and I was talking with a Trotskyite. There was a Trotskyite there, and I was talking with this Trotskyite, and we were engaging with each other about politics. And I remember this Trotskyite said to me, he said, you're too smart to be in the Workers' World Party. I said, you're too smart to be in the Workers' World Party. I could have punched that guy. I swear, I am not a violent person, but it took everything within me not to just slug him in the face, and I didn't. I never, in any moment, can I recall being so angry at somebody when he said to me, you're too smart to be in the Workers' World Party. And I was ready to just kick this guy's ass. I was so angry. I was furious with him for saying that. And you know why? Because it was true. It was true. I knew what he was saying was true, and I didn't want to acknowledge it. I was trying my hardest to keep organizing in this political group that had no future. And he was pointing out that the group was anti-intellectual. He was pointing out that the leaders of the group weren't too bright. He was pointing out that if I actually understood this stuff, I shouldn't be wasting my time in this group, and I didn't want to hear it because it was true. And often, when you bring a truth to people, but it's a truth that people don't want to hear. It's a truth that people don't want to hear. They know it's true, but they don't want to hear it. They can just get really angry. Very, very angry. Very, very angry. Very, very angry. Because of the fact that what you're saying is true. What you're saying is true. And I've noticed that when dealing with people on the left, people who are interested in socialism, but their whole life has become centered around pessimism. Their whole life has become centered around the pessimistic worldview that they've absorbed from the capitalists. Their whole life has been centered around this destructive vandal mindset that they've gotten from mainstream U.S. media, they've gotten from U.S. society, they've gotten from, people have absorbed this pessimism, this dark pessimism. They've absorbed it. They've absorbed this dark pessimism. And when you sit there and deconstruct that pessimism, they get angry. And a lot of times when people disagree with me, I've argued with people about a number of issues. But when I argue with them, it really gets down to the fact that what we're arguing about is not about politics. It's not about whatever it is they want to argue with me about. In reality, I'm arguing against their pessimism. I'm arguing against their worldview. They have absorbed this worldview that there is no hope, that the world is falling apart, there is no future, everything is going to shit. They've absorbed that. And the things that I say are a smack in the face to that worldview. And they're not fighting for a position. They're not fighting for a position. They are fighting to maintain their pessimism. They are fighting to maintain that hopeless worldview. And that is what I'm arguing with. And the reason they become angry and vicious, it's just like me arguing with that Trotskyite. He said to me, "You're too smart to be in the group you're in." I hated him because I knew it was true. And that's the effect that I often have on people. I say things that deconstruct their pessimism, deconstruct their hopelessness, deconstruct their belief that there is no way forward. And by doing that, I dismantle something that is very, very essential. Not a political point, not a political ideological point, no. No, I dismantle a feeling they have, a pessimistic, hopeless feeling that they have, that is essential to how they understand the world. I'm going to go over 3 points that I routinely make on these lives and show you how the opposition to them, the opposition to these 3 political points I frequently make, is not based on politics. It is based on pessimism. Point number 1. Violent revolution is something that Marxists do not advocate. Right? That seems to go against everything you've ever heard, right? Che Guevara was running through the woods with a gun, right? The Russian Revolution was violent. The Chinese Revolution was violent. Violence seems to be, we're always told in school, communists are violent, bomb-throwing extremist revolutionaries. So when I come along and I tell you communists don't advocate violent revolution, you hear that, and that seems to spit in the face of everything you've been told. But who have you been told it by? The bourgeoisie. And the reality is that socialists always favor a peaceful transition. Peaceful transitions don't often happen, but that's not because socialists wouldn't prefer it. That's because the capitalists prefer it. The capitalists prefer it. The capitalists want a situation where the people are not free to organize. And in response to people engaging in peaceful democratic struggle, fighting for their rights, the capitalists become very violent and they suppress people's democratic rights. And people have to defend themselves. And that's how revolutions tend to happen. The Russian Revolution happened because the Tsar was brought down and there was a division in the ruling class. And the Bolsheviks were those who opposed the war. And Kornilov was trying to become the military dictator to crush the sections of Russian society that didn't support continuing World War I. And so the Bolsheviks defended the provisional government from Kornilov's reaction. And through that process, built up enough power that they could declare their Soviets to be the new government. The Russian Revolution didn't happen because the Bolsheviks went around with guns acting crazy. It happened because they organized peacefully against the war. They organized peacefully for democratic rights. The Tsar was brought down. They then mobilized to defend the existing government from an attempted, fascist putsch. And in that process became strong enough they could declare themselves the government. The Chinese Revolution. Again, the communists joined the government of Sun Yat-sen. They joined the Republic of China. They were a peaceful faction within the wing of the ruling class, within the Chinese Revolution and Dr. Sun Yat-sen's nationalist movement. But their ability to peacefully organize was repressed. Chiang Kai-shek started killing communists and murdering them. So they fled to the countryside and carved out liberated territory. Eventually, they joined an alliance with Chiang Kai-shek to defeat Japan. And then after the Second World War, they were denied the ability to be part of the government. They wanted to form a joint government with Chiang Kai-shek, but he wouldn't allow it. He was suppressing them, was trying to force them to give up the liberated territories, trying to dismantle the Chinese communist organizations that had been built throughout the fight against Japan. And so the communists took up arms to defend themselves, and that's where the People's Republic of China comes from, right? That communists always want a peaceful transition to socialism. It's the ruling class that prevents that. It's the ruling class that mobilizes violently to suppress their ability to peacefully organize. And yes, when communists come to power, they want to create a new state. They don't want to simply seize hold of the existing state apparatus. They want a new state, a new constitution, a new police force, a new military, a new economic system, right? But they would prefer to carry out that transition peacefully. It is the capitalists that are the ones that are the advocates of violence. Communists never advocate a violent revolution. They advocate a peaceful transition to socialism, a popular anti-monopoly state. And the capitalists will not allow it and suppress people's democratic rights and force people into a situation where millions and millions of people who have organized peacefully, who have built new institutions, who have no choice and are facing brutal suppression, it's a kill or be killed situation, and then they take up arms to defend themselves. That's a different situation. But advocating violence, advocating a violent revolution, is a pessimistic position. It's a position that goes to working people and says, I don't want to make your life better. I want to see a big, ugly civil war in your country. I want there to be destruction and death and chaos in the streets. Well, that's not a position you're going to win people over to. People don't want to see their neighborhoods and their communities reduced to chaos and a civil war. People don't want that. People want their life to get better. And communists are advocates of optimism. And so with our message of we want to move the USA towards socialism, here is what socialism would look like, here are some transitional demands that would be a transition to socialism, we put forward an optimistic message. And so why do people get so fired up and angry when you tell them this? Why, right? I'm pointing out what Lenin says and what is said by William Z. Foster, what is said by all the great revolutionaries. We would prefer a peaceful transition, but the capitalists most likely are going to be violent and suppress our ability to do that. But we present a vision for a peaceful transition. Why do people get so upset? Because their worldview as a communist, their belief that we need to overthrow capitalism is based on a destructive impulse. It's based on this, I hate the world, I want to tear things down, I want to destroy things. That's not the way you talk if you're a socialist. If you're going to organize the broad masses of people, you don't go out there and say, I want to destroy things. I don't want to make your life worse. I don't want to bring chaos. You must bring a progressive message, an optimistic message. But if someone's belief in socialism is all based on pessimism, they're going to vilely reject that. No, I want a violent revolution. I want killing. I want that. Well, then you're not. That's your pessimism. That's the pessimism you've observed from this system. Socialists are constantly saying, we will make your life better. And here's how. And here's how socialism would make your life better. The second point that I'm widely attacked for saying, that is another illustration of this, is the billionaires thing, right? I've said that the slogan, abolish billionaires, is an anti-Marxist slogan. Why? Because Marxism does not oppose wealth. It opposes exploitation. It opposes the oppression of man by man. It opposes the system of profits and command. The reason Jeff Bezos is bad is not because he has $1 billion, and no one should ever have exactly $1 billion. And once you have $1,000,001,000, you are a bad person. That's not why. That's not why. The reason Jeff Bezos is bad is because he has his billions of dollars by exploiting workers. And he uses his billions of dollars to make other people poor. And the goal of socialism is to build a society with so much abundance and so much prosperity the state can wither away. Socialism does not oppose wealth. Socialism opposes exploitation. And the goal of socialism is to make so much wealth, that all of society can rise from poverty, that poverty and scarcity can be eliminated. And if you say wealth is bad, if you say no one should ever have this much wealth, you are abandoning the project of ever-reaching communism. You are abandoning the vision of a stateless, classless world, because a stateless, classless world requires vast material abundance. Abolish billionaires is saying we don't want wealth. Wealth is bad. It obscures the problem. It obscures the class question. Why is so much wealth concentrated in the hands of a few? Because of property relations. Because of property relations. Property relations. Because one group of people owns the means of production and enriches themselves at the expense of others. We want to get rid of that. We want an economy that organizes for public good, not profits. Well, if your worldview is not that, it's not that we can get beyond capitalism, we can get beyond the system of profits and command. If your worldview instead is based on, it's not fair that some people have stuff. I hate these people who have it more than me. I want to punish somebody else. I want to tear somebody else down. If that's your worldview, we need to go back to nature. If everyone has too much nowadays. The earth is going to explode because of climate change. Well, if that's your worldview, that's not Marxism. But of course, if someone's worldview is based on not we can get beyond capitalism, not we can get beyond a system where Jeff Bezos enriches himself at everyone else's expense, but if someone's worldview is instead based on the belief that we just want to punish people who have more than what we have, and resentment and tear things down, and if that's your belief, you are going to actively resist someone who says, no, there is hope for humanity. We can all live far wealthier than billionaires live because we'll eliminate a system that leads to exploitation. Communism is based on vast material abundance. And when you're arguing with somebody about this point, you're not really arguing with them about Marxism. You're arguing against that pessimistic worldview, right? You're arguing against a worldview that says there is no hope for the human race, that says, F this shit, give me free stuff, right? That's what you're arguing against. Final point, really existing socialism. Are there societies in the world today that have socialism? Yes, right? There's Cuba, there's People's Korea, there's Vietnam, there's Venezuela, Bolivia, Nicaragua, China. There are socialist societies in the world today. There are societies where the banks, factories, and industries are organized to serve public good and not profits. Now, those societies are societies in which they have seized control of the means of production, and they've done it on a basis of extreme scarcity. These countries are very, very, very poor. But it's through socialism that they've been able to lift their heads up. Read about the economic achievements of Vietnam, the economic miracle the World Business Forum talked about. Read about what China has done. Read about how the Soviet Union rapidly industrialized. Yes, socialism exists. Does socialism have problems? You betcha. Does socialist countries do bad things? You betcha. Are there things in the history of socialism that are not good? You betcha. You betcha. But do socialist countries, where the means of production are operated to serve the public good and not profits, do they exist? Yes. But why is the internet full of people who think it doesn't? Because if it exists, that means we have to engage with it. That means socialism isn't a paradise in your head. That means everything in the world doesn't suck. That means you have to take sides in international confrontations. And they don't want to do that. Right? They have this pessimistic worldview. Nothing good exists in the world. Nothing good exists in the world. Everything in the world is bad. There is no hope. That's their worldview. They are clinging to that worldview. And so they get very angry if you say Cuba's socialist, China's socialist, Vietnam. No, they're not. It's not a paradise. It's not a society with no state. It's not a society where everyone is exactly equal. Oh, it's not a society where there's no homophobia. It's not a society where there's no sexism. So therefore, this is how these people argue. You're not really arguing with them about whether or not this country is socialist. You're arguing with that pessimistic worldview because socialism actually existing in the world is a threat to that pessimistic worldview. If socialism actually exists, then you have to align with it. Then you have to engage with it. But they want to just remain pessimistic. Folks, I may sound like a complete hypocrite now, but I do social media. I'm all over social media, but I'm telling you, social media is a brainwashing tool, right? Social media is a brainwashing tool if there ever was one. It's a brainwashing tool, and people absorb the view of the class enemy. People absorb the pessimism and hopelessness of the ruling class. They absorb it. They absorb it, they absorb it, they absorb it. And if you are going to live a happy life as a socialist, if you are going to make a contribution to the struggle of humanity to get beyond the rule of profits, you're going to have to push back. You are going to have to push back against the wave of pessimism and hopelessness that we all absorb in this technotronic age, as Zbigniew Brzezinski talked about it, in which those who control the information are the rulers. You are going to have to fight back against the wave of hopelessness and pessimism that is coming out of your iPhone and your iPad and your TV and your computer. You're going to have to learn to fight back. Not in terms of actual violence, but in terms of psychological struggle. You are going to have to battle against the pessimism and darkness and hopelessness within your own soul. If you are going to be able to become a socialist and make a great contribution to humanity, you're going to have to fight against the dark, pessimistic hopelessness within your own spirit. That's my message for you all today. Now today, folks, I hate to do this, but we are going to have to do things slightly differently than we normally do. The reason for that is because of something that I just became aware of. So what we're going to do is we all have our super chat questions. I am going to take a brief pause, just a few minutes tops. I'm going to stop this stream, and in about 10 minutes, I'm going to launch a new stream. And when we launch the new stream, I will answer your super chat questions, we'll do the roll call, and we will complete this conversation. But because of something that just happened, I need to end the stream now. But we will resume in about 10 or 15 minutes. I'll post the link in the chat, and we'll start a new stream. So I apologize for doing this, but my opening remarks have just concluded. I'm ready to do the roll call, but unfortunately, I have to interrupt this briefly. So I will get back to you shortly. So yeah, just keep your eye out for the new link to the new stream.